Amid the blood-soaked fragments of Middle Eastern history, there's one long chapter often overlooked. For 8 years, two great nations, once the centers of ancient empires, Mesopotamia and Persia, were locked in one of the most brutal, longest, and most horrifying conflicts of the modern era. Many have said this war was no less terrifying than World War I. From September 22, 1980 to August 20, 1988, Iran and Iraq were trapped in a life-and-death struggle, claiming between 500,000 to 1 million lives. Rotting trenches, endless minefields, and chemical gas that tore apart lungs all became symbols of this war's cruelty. Yet, the tragedy of this war was that, no matter who would win, the world would not care to remember. This war began with a revolution. After the 1979 Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah of Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini aimed to export this revolution across the world. He declared that the revolution would spread to all corners of the earth, and that Arab nationalism must be erased for the sake of a greater Islamic unity. For Saddam Hussein, then leading Iraq, Khomeini's words were not just empty rhetoric. He saw them as an existential threat. Iraq, with around 65% of its population being Shia, had historically been marginalized under Sunni rule. Saddam feared Khomeini's calls would spark rebellion among Iraq's Shia population, toppling his regime. This fear was evident in Saddam's dramatic actions before the war. In 1979, he declared martial law in Karbala and Najaf to suppress protests supported by Iran. He placed the prominent Shia cleric, Ayatollah Mohammad Bakir al-Sadr, under house arrest. And in 1980, al-Sadr and his sister were executed, accused of being agents of Iran's revolution. Saddam also expelled over 100,000 Iraqi Shias suspected of supporting Iran. This conflict, however, also held a deeply personal dimension. Khomeini had spent years in exile in Najaf, Iraq. In 1978, under pressure from the Shah, Saddam expelled Khomeini, a humiliation Khomeini would never forget. When Khomeini returned to Iran as supreme leader, his hatred for Saddam was both personal and ideological. This explains why, when Iraq offered ceasefire in 1982, Khomeini firmly rejected it, vowed to continue the war until the Little Satan regime in Baghdad was overthrown. Ideology was the fuel, but an old border dispute was the spark. At the center was the Shat al-Arab waterway, Iraq's only access to the Persian Gulf, vital for its trade. In 1975, to end Iran's support for the Kurdish rebellion in Iraq, Saddam, then vice president, reluctantly signed the Algiers Agreement, granting Iran control over the eastern bank of the waterway. After Iran's revolution, Saddam saw an opportunity. He believed Iran was in chaos, its military weakened by purges, and the country isolated internationally. It was the perfect moment to cancel the humiliating Algiers Agreement, to reclaim full control over the Shat al-Arab, and perhaps seize Khuzestan, Iran's oil-rich province with a significant Arab population, which Iraq referred to as Arabistan. On September 22, 1980, believing in a quick victory, Iraqi forces crossed the border, hoping to deliver a swift destruction to Iran. But Saddam's vision of a rapid invasion was far from reality. Iran's fierce resistance stopped Iraq's advance. Within months, the war turned into a nightmare, echoing the horrors of the Western Front in World War I. The battlefield became a place of brutality, where ideology and material conditions shaped equally terrifying methods of combat. The front lines froze along the Shat al-Arab. Both sides dug extensive networks of trenches, lined with barbed wire, deadly minefields, and machine gun nests facing each other. Battles to capture or hold border cities like Basra and Khorramshahr became human meat grinders, where progress was measured in meters, paid for with thousands of lives. At the war's start, Iran lacked sufficient military equipment, but compensated by sending millions of Basij volunteers, fueled by Shia martyrdom ideals. These volunteers charged through minefields and trenches and waves, leading to tens of thousands of Iranian casualties, especially when attacking Iraqi defensive lines. This horrifying tactic turned the borderlands into a frozen sea of corpses, driven by patriotic zeal and the promise of paradise for young fighters. Yet, for years, the front barely moved, trapping hundreds of thousands in a deadly cycle of offensives and counteroffensives. If Iran used faith and fervor, Iraq used technology in its most terrifying form. Systematically, Iraq employed chemical weapons to counter Iran's numerical advantage, committing war crimes repeatedly with little international condemnation. Iraq used various chemical agents, including mustard gas, causing severe burns and blisters, and nerve agents like dabun and sarin, which attacked the nervous system, causing death through suffocation. These weapons were widely used on battlefields like the Majnan Islands and during the recapture of the Al-Faw Peninsula. But Iraq's chemical brutality was not limited to soldiers. In March 1988, as retaliation for Kurdish cooperation with Iran, Iraq's Air Force dropped chemical bombs on the Kurdish city of Halabja. For days, Iraqi aircraft spread a deadly cocktail of mustard gas and nerve agents over the city. The result was apocalyptic. Around 5,000 civilians, mostly women and children, died instantly in the streets and in their homes, while tens of thousands suffered burns, blindness, lung damage, and long-term health effects like cancer and birth defects. As the bloody ground war stalled, both sides, desperate to break each other's will, expanded the conflict to civilian life and economic arteries. The skies above major cities and the strategic Persian Gulf waters became new arenas of total war, dragging civilians and international interests into the violence, starting sporadically and escalating by the mid-1980s. The War of the Cities became a campaign of terror. Iraq and Iran launched ballistic missiles at each other's population centers, aiming not for military objectives, but to spread fear, break morale, and pressure governments to surrender. Iraq held the advantage, modifying Soviet Scud missiles into the Al-Hussein, capable of reaching deep into Iran, including Tehran. Iran, with Scuds from Libya, retaliated by targeting Baghdad and other Iraqi cities. At the height of this phase, air raid sirens became a daily part of life in both capitals. Inaccurate strikes killed thousands, injured tens of thousands, and triggered mass exoduses to the countryside. Meanwhile, another war raged at sea. The Tanker War was Iraq's strategy to cripple Iran's oil-dependent economy, starting in 1981 and intensifying in 1984. Iraq used advanced French-supplied jets and missiles to target tankers leaving Iranian ports. Iran retaliated by attacking ships bound for Gulf states supporting Iraq, especially Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, using Revolutionary Guard speedboats and Chinese Silkworm anti-ship missiles. This escalation threatened global oil supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. Saddam's strategy aimed to provoke international intervention, hoping that by threatening global oil arteries, major powers would pressure Iran to end the war. Ironically, the strategy worked, but with consequences Saddam never foresaw. The U.S. Navy intervened to protect Kuwaiti tankers, helping Iraq, but also establishing a permanent American military presence in the Gulf, a force that would later return to remove Saddam himself. Nearly the entire world, in practice, sided with Iraq. The Soviet Union became Iraq's largest arms supplier, joined by China and France. Arab Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and UAE poured billions into Iraq's economy to sustain the war. The West, including the US, the UK, and West Germany, overtly and covertly provided technology and intelligence to Iraq. The CIA facilitated non-US weapons transfers to ensure Saddam would not lose. Iran, meanwhile, was isolated, receiving limited support from Syria, Libya, North Korea, and minimal Soviet aid. Covertly, Israel also provided anti-aircraft and anti-tank weapons through the Iran-Contra scandal, while the Reagan administration denied direct orders for such transactions. The Iran-Iraq War left deep scars, reshaping Middle Eastern geopolitics. For Iraq, 8 years of war meant economic devastation and massive debt. Saddam returned with Iraq intact, but burdened with over $80 billion in debt by 1990. Infrastructure lay in ruins, foreign reserves were depleted, and Iraqi nationalism faded under economic crisis and political pressure. Saddam felt humiliated, accusing Gulf states of using Iraq as a war dog to be discarded afterward. When Kuwait refused to cancel Iraq's debt and increased oil production, lowering global prices, Saddam saw it as an insult. This led to Iraq's 1990 invasion of Kuwait, sparking the Gulf War, bringing Iraq into direct conflict with the United States and an international coalition. For Iran, the war affirmed its status as a regional power. The experience motivated Iran to strengthen its self-reliant military, believing it needed deterrence against future chemical attacks. The war also changed regional security dynamics. The Strait of Hormuz became heavily militarized, with the U.S. protecting tankers and Iran building fast attack craft and anti-ship missiles to potentially close the strait in future conflicts. Domestically, Iraq's Sunni-Shia divide worsened, while the seeds of future conflicts, including the 1988 Anfal genocide against the Kurds, were sown during this brutal war.